Imagine your 2 o'clock client sits down on the couch in your office.
Okay.
They are, a perfectly healthy, highly successful structural engineer,
Okay.
no history of psychosis in their family at all, no substance abuse. They pay their taxes. They coach their kids' soccer team.
Right. They're just a completely grounded, everyday person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Incredibly grounded. And then, with a completely steady voice, they calmly tell you that last night they woke up paralyzed.
Uh-huh.
They floated through the ceiling of their bedroom and engaged in this telepathic conversation with an intelligence that did not feel human.
And as a clinician, your immediate reflex kicks in.
Right. You glance at your diagnostic manual and it immediately screams schizophrenia or, schizoaffective disorder. But the client's effect, their logic, their overall functioning, it all says something entirely different. Welcome to the deep dive.
It really is the ultimate clinical paradox. And if you are a mental health professional listening to this right now, like a therapist, a clinical psychologist, or a licensed clinical social worker, this exact scenario is no longer just some fringe hypothetical.
No, not at all.
This demographic is increasingly walking right into your practice. We are talking about the UAP, or Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, and NHI, Non-Human Intelligence Experiencer.
Which means we really need to set the parameters for our discussion today right out of the gate. We are opening a massive stack of clinical literature, psychological surveys, and, transpersonal philosophy today to understand this demographic.
Yeah, we have a lot of ground to cover.
We do, but I want to be super clear. This is not a debate about whether aliens are physically landing on the White House lawn. We aren't here to authenticate spacecraft or, debate government cover-ups.
Exactly. That's a totally different conversation.
Right. We are here for a clinical and sociological examination of a deeply transformative, deeply disruptive human experience. Our mission for this deep dive is to equip you with practical, client-centered therapeutic approaches.
Because you need the tools to actually support these individuals.
Yes, exactly. While also analyzing the profound societal shifts happening right now as we kind of transition from a strict physicalist reality to a multidimensional one.
And to do that effectively, we first have to bulldoze the historical biases that are just deeply entrenched in our profession.
Oh, they are so entrenched.
Right. For decades, the default setting for a clinician, hearing a client report a transpersonal encounter like missing time, telepathic communication, anomalous lights, was to immediately screen for psychopathology.
You just assume they're sick.
Exactly. The assumption was always, that the client was suffering from psychosis or maybe a schizotypal personality disorder or perhaps sleep paralysis coupled with a severe false memory syndrome. The clinical reflex was just to pathologize the anomalous.
Because it's honestly easier to diagnose a broken brain than a broken reality.
That is perfectly stated, yes.
But the thing is, the hard data completely contradicts that reflex. Let's look at the work of the late Dr. John E. Mack. And for the listener, this wasn't some fringe, internet research.
No, not at all. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning psychiatrist.
At Harvard Medical School.
Right. And he entered this field as a very rigid skeptic. He literally assumed these individuals were suffering from some nuanced, undiagnosed mental illness that the broader psychiatric community had just somehow missed.
He thought he was going to crack the code on a new pathology.
Exactly. So he applied the most rigorous psychiatric evaluations available at the time to over 100 experiencers. And his findings basically shocked the entire psychiatric establishment.
Because he didn't find the pathology.
He found a near total absence of obvious mental illness. Like, there was no widespread schizophrenia, there were no pervasive personality disorders that could explain the phenomena. These were just ordinary people, lawyers, farmers, teachers, people whose psychological profiles were, for all intents and purposes, completely mundane.
And if you want quantitative data to back up those qualitative interviews, we have to look at the landmark 1993 study by Dr. Nicholas Spanos.
Oh, that's a crucial one.
It really is. So they took subjects who reported UFO experiences and divided them into cohorts. They had a non-intense group, people who just saw lights in the sky.
Right.
And an intense group, which involved direct communication, missing time, or actual non-human entity contact. Then they administered a heavy battery of objective psychological tests.
And the tools they used are foundational to clinical psychology. They used the MMPI.
The Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory.
Yes, which is specifically designed to assess psychopathology. And they also use the 16PF, which evaluates healthy personality functioning.
Wait, let me pause you there, though. Because if a client is actively delusional, couldn't a highly intelligent person just kind of fake their way through a personality test to appear sane? I could hear a skeptical clinician asking that right now.
It's a totally fair clinical question, but the MMPI is specifically built to prevent exactly that.
Okay, how so?
It has built-in validity scales, like the L scale for lying or the F scale, which detects when someone is over-reporting or under-reporting symptoms. It is incredibly difficult to mask genuine psychosis or malingering on a full MMPI.
So it catches the inconsistencies.
Exactly. It touches internal inconsistencies, paranoia markers, disorganized thinking, and the results of the Spanos study were definitive. The objective test revealed that these intense experiencers scored no higher on psychopathology than the control groups.
That's wild. So they weren't more hypnotizable.
Nope. They weren't less intelligent either. In fact, on certain 16PF scales, they were actually described as more resourceful and independent than the control groups.
Okay, so diagnosing these clients with a psychotic disorder simply because their experience defies our materialist worldview. It's like diagnosing a perfectly healthy deep-sea diver with a breathing disorder just because humans aren't supposed to breathe underwater.
That's a great analogy.
Right. Like the environment they're navigating has radically changed, but their internal physiological apparatus is functioning exactly as it should.
That captures the clinical reality perfectly. The
Yeah.
environment or the consensus reality is what has shifted here. And once we accept that this population is not inherently pathological, we have an obligation to look at what they are actually reporting.
Which brings us to the Free study.
Yes. The Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences.
That's how fair.
It really is, but they conducted the first massive, comprehensive, quantitative investigation into this demographic. We are talking about a sample size of 3,256 individuals.
Over 3,000 people, answering incredibly detailed surveys about their encounters. And the data from that study completely shatters the Hollywood narrative we're all used to.
Right, because pop culture has trained us to expect the terrifying, nuts and bolts, physical abduction scenario, the surgical tables, all of that.
Yeah, exactly. But the Airy Free study revealed that physical abductions are actually the extreme minority. A staggering 75% of these individuals report that their contact is non-physical.
Which is huge.
It is. They describe telepathic downloads, out-of-body experiences, or being pulled into what they consistently refer to as matrix-like or energetic realities.
And that fundamentally changes the dynamic in the therapy room.
Yeah.
You aren't usually dealing with a client who believes their physical body was forcefully dragged onto a metallic spacecraft.
Right.
You are dealing with someone who is navigating a spontaneous, profound expansion of consciousness that occurred outside the bounds of physical space and time.
And the emotional fallout of that expansion is fascinating because roughly 70% of the Free Feed study participants claimed the experience ultimately changed their life in a positive way.
That's a huge majority.
Yeah. Only 15 to 20% reported a strictly negative impact. So we're looking at a generally healthy population having predominantly non-physical, ultimately positive, yet highly disruptive experiences.
However, I do want to point out that while we've ruled out pathology, the literature does identify psychological markers that seem to predispose individuals to these encounters.
Okay, let's get into that.
Kenneth Ring, who is a prominent researcher in near-death experiences and anomalous phenomena, identified what he calls the encounter-prone personality. Experiencers often demonstrate significantly higher levels of something called psychological absorption.
Let's define that for the listener really quickly.
Yeah.
Psychological absorption is the capacity to become totally immersed in a sensory or imaginative experience.
Right.
It's the person who gets so lost in a symphony or a novel that the outside world completely fades away. And they also tend to have a higher tendency to dissociate and show higher levels of fantasy proneness.
And that right there is where the clinical waters get very murky.
Yeah, because that's a massive red flag for a therapist.
Yeah.
I mean, if I have a client who scores exceptionally high on fantasy proneness,
Yeah.
how on earth do I distinguish between them just having a really rich, imaginative inner life and them having a genuine transpersonal encounter with non-human intelligence?
You look at the somatic footprint and the durability of the value shift. Let's break that down because it's vital. A rich fantasy life, even a highly immersive maladaptive daydreaming scenario, rarely induces severe trauma-like somatic responses. When a genuine experiencer sits in your office, their nervous system is often dysregulated in a very specific way. You will see tactile defensiveness. You might see spontaneous physiological marks that actually appear on their body in relation to the memory. Yeah. You see the classic neurobiological markers of PTSD. hyperarousal, elevated cortisol responses, all tied to an event they claim happened outside of physical reality.
So it's the difference between playing a really immersive virtual reality game and actually touching a hot stove.
Exactly.
Like the VR game might make your heart race, it might scare you, but it doesn't leave a third-degree burn on your hand.
Exactly the mechanism I'm talking about. Furthermore, fantasy is typically a psychological retreat from reality. It is a coping mechanism to avoid the stressors of the mundane world.
Right, you escape into the daydream.
Right. But these transpersonal encounters function in the exact opposite way. They act as a shattering of reality. They don't provide a safe haven. They provoke a crisis. They result in profound, permanent, and often highly disruptive value shifts that just do not align with mere daydreaming.
And that shattering of reality is the core clinical issue we need to talk about. If they aren't suffering from traditional delusions, what are they suffering from? They are suffering from the total collapse of their consensus reality. They are suffering from ontological shock.
Ontological shock is arguably the primary presenting issue for the experiencer client. Even if they walk into your office complaining of, say, anxiety or insomnia.
It's the root cause.
Yes. As a clinician, you must understand ontological shock not just as cognitive dissonance, but as a profound structural disruption in a person's fundamental understanding of existence. It is the sudden realization that the bedrock rules of physics, time, and biology that govern their entire life are incomplete or entirely false.
It's existential whiplash.
That's exactly it.
The contrast between this extraordinary, physics-defying event and the mundane reality of everyday life creates a profound sense of the absurd. I always think of Kafka's The Metamorphosis.
Oh, that's a brilliant comparison.
Right. You wake up, you've just engaged with a multidimensional intelligence that communicated the interconnectedness of the cosmos directly into your mind. But you still have to put on a tie, sit in traffic, and pretend to care about a Q3 earnings report at your 9 a.m. Zoom meeting. It is profoundly isolating.
It creates a massive schism in the psyche. The client basically has to maintain two contradictory realities simultaneously, and we have to recognize that this isn't just happening on an individual level anymore.
Now it's systemic now.
Right. We are currently watching this happen on a macro societal level. The societal movement toward disclosure, the government and institutional acknowledgement of UAPs and potential NHI that acts as a slow-rolling macro-level epistemic collapse.
Because the shared map that Western civilization has used to navigate reality since the Enlightenment is disintegrating in real time.
Exactly. The scientific materialism that says if you can't measure it in a lab, it doesn't exist, is failing to contain the phenomena.
So when that map burns up, the individual has to build a completely new one from scratch. And Kathleen Martin, an experiencer advocate and researcher who has worked extensively in this field, outlines a really brilliant framework for this rebuilding process.
Yes, her work is essential.
She identifies 4 distinct stages of the experiencer journey. And if you are a therapist, understanding this map is vital so you can locate where your client is currently stranded. Let's walk through those.
So stage 1 is shock and denial. This is the immediate aftermath of the paradigm-shattering event. The mind desperately tries to find logical, mundane explanations to maintain its old worldview.
They want to be wrong.
They desperately want to be wrong. They want it to be a hallucination, a weird dream, or a side effect of medication. Because if they are right, their entire reality is upended.
And in this stage, you're going to see aggressive coping mechanisms flare up in your practice. Right?
Absolutely.
You'll see sudden substance abuse, overeating, or classic PTSD symptoms like severe hypervigilance and sleep disturbances. They are trying to numb the awareness, but the denial inevitably breaks down, which pushes them into stage 2.
Which is fear and anger. The anger in stage 2 is multifaceted. It is characterized by intense feelings of victimization. They feel a profound loss of control. Their personal sovereignty and their basic human rights have been violated by an intelligence they cannot stop and understand.
Which is terrifying.
It is. But the anger is also directed outward. They are angry at society, at the government, at the religious leaders for lying to them or failing to prepare them for this reality.
And that anger and alienation usher them right into stage 3. Exploration and isolation. This is the shedding phase. It's like finding out Santa Claus isn't real, but on a cosmic scale.
Right.
They realize the authorities don't have the answers, so they have to find them themselves. And they start tumbling down massive informational rabbit holes.
And because their new worldview is so radical, it alienates them from their family, their peers, and their traditional support structures. They isolate themselves to protect their fragile new understanding of the world.
Okay, let me put you in the hot seat on behalf of the listener.
Go for it.
If I have a client who is stuck deep in this exploration phase, let's say they are obsessively consuming UFO lore, government conspiracy theories, and interdimensional physics on internet forums at 3 a.m. every single night.
Very common scenario.
How do I keep them grounded? Because if I challenge the material they are reading, I risk invalidating their genuine search for meaning. But if I don't challenge it, I'm just watching them spiral into obsessive isolation.
It is an incredibly delicate tightrope, and it requires redefining the therapeutic alliance. Your role as the clinician in stage 3 is not to authenticate or debunk the objective reality of the rabbit hole they are exploring.
You aren't fact-checking them.
Exactly. You are not a physicist, and you are not an investigative journalist. Your role is to facilitate the transition to stage 4 by focusing relentlessly on the client's emotional regulation and somatic safety.
So how does that actually sound in the room?
Well, you validate the emotional reality of their search. You might say something like, "It makes complete sense to me that after experiencing something so profound, you feel an urgent need to understand it. Your search for truth is completely valid. But I am noticing that spending 5 hours a night on these forums is keeping your nervous system in a constant state of threat."
So you bring it back to the body.
Right. You ask, "How is your body feeling right now as we discuss this?" You gently guide them back to their physiological present. You help them regulate their nervous system so they have the bandwidth to actually process the new information consciously, rather than compulsively consuming it out of sheer terror.
You are building their capacity to hold the unknown.
Yes.
Because the ultimate goal is to help them navigate into stage 4, relinquishment and recalibration. This is the integration phase.
The most important phase.
Right. They merge the old mundane reality and the new multidimensional reality into a coherent, functioning worldview. The obsessive fear drops away. They develop expanded intuition, emotional maturity, and a deep, abiding sense of peace. They accept that the universe is infinitely more complex than they were taught, and they find a new, stable place within it.
Which brings us to a really crucial question of causality.
Let's hear it.
If ontological shock is the result of the experience, what makes certain individuals susceptible to the experience in the first place? Why does one person have a transpersonal encounter while their spouse, sleeping right next to them in the same bed, experiences nothing?
Right. Why them?
The clinical literature takes a fascinating turn here, pointing to a very strong correlation with prior trauma.
And this is a massive paradigm shift for how we view these encounters. Normally, the clinical assumption is that the anomalous event causes the trauma, like the abduction causes the PTSD.
Exactly. But researchers like Kenneth Ring and the sociological data explored in Kelly Chase's Inquiry podcast suggest the inverse might actually be true. Trauma might actually be a prerequisite.
It acts as a permeability agent.
Yes. The data shows that early childhood trauma, severe physical abuse, or even mass collective trauma like the Silver Bridge disaster studied by the Kusula's team in Point Pleasant is highly overrepresented in experiencer populations.
Okay, so to understand the mechanics of why trauma would open someone up to transpersonal experiences, we really have to look at cognitive neuroscience. Specifically, we need to examine Carl Friston's predictive processing model and Donald Hoffman's interface theory of perception.
Yes.
Break those down for us. How does the brain actually process reality?
Okay, so under normal conditions, the human brain operates as an evolutionary filter. According to Friston's free energy principle, the brain's primary directive is to minimize surprise or cognitive uncertainty.
Wants to know what's coming.
Exactly. It does this by constantly generating a predictive model of the world. It predicts what you are going to see, hear, and feel before it even happens. And it uses sensory input merely to correct errors in that prediction. The brain aggressively filters out anomalous, non-essential data to keep the system stable.
And then Donald Hoffman takes this even further with interface theory.
Right.
He argues that evolutionary pressure doesn't favor organisms that see objective reality. It favors organisms that see a simplified interface geared strictly towards survival and reproduction. I always think of it like a video game rendering engine.
That's a perfect way to picture it.
To save processing power, the game only renders the graphics exactly where your character is looking. The rest of the digital world doesn't exist in a rendered state until you turn your head. Our brains do the same thing. They project a simplified, species-specific user interface that hides the blinding complexity of the actual quantum universe.
And this brings us back to the role of trauma. Severe, life-altering trauma acts as a catastrophic system failure for that rendering engine.
The system crashes.
Yes. When a child experiences profound abuse or a community experiences a sudden massive disaster, the brain's predictive model of a safe, predictable world is violently shattered. The factory-installed firewall that filters out anomalous data cracks, the brain becomes porous.
I think of it like the human brain being a highly advanced set of noise-canceling headphones.
Oh, I like that.
Normally, the brain is actively generating this injurious wave to cancel out the overwhelming background frequency of the broader universe. So we can focus on the immediate localized sounds of survival eating, mating, paying taxes, listening for predators.
Right.
But severe trauma damages the noise-canceling hardware. Suddenly the filter drops, and you can hear the entire cosmic roar. You start receiving data from what philosophers call the Überumwelt, or mind at large.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it.
Yep.
Transpersonal psychologists refer to this noise-canceling state as the materialist trance. It is a cultural and biological hypnosis that trains us to perceive the world as dead, mechanical, and strictly localized.
And trauma breaks this trance.
Exactly. So when a client sits in front of you, therapeutic integration isn't about fixing a broken brain. The brain is actually functioning with its filters down. The clinical task involves helping the client build new conscious filters. You are helping them construct a new psychological scaffolding so they aren't completely overwhelmed by this newly acquired multidimensional awareness.
Okay, so let's get highly practical here. What does this actually look like in the therapy room? Now that we understand the mechanisms, the cracked cognitive filters, the profound ontological shock, the 4 stages of adaptation, what specific, actionable tools can a clinician pull out of their toolbox?
Well, we must first address the acute suffering. While the majority of experiencers eventually report positive long-term outcomes, about 15 to 20% of clients experience severe, debilitating negative impacts.
And we can't ignore that.
No, absolutely not. We are talking about classic textbook PTSD presentation. Night terrors, intrusive thoughts, severe tactile defensiveness, and generalized crippling anxiety. For these individuals, you cannot jump straight into philosophical integration. You have to treat the trauma directly.
And the beauty here is that you don't need to reinvent the wheel or, learn some esoteric alien integration therapy. You can rely on evidence-based, trauma-focused psychotherapies endorsed by organizations like the VA, specifically EMDRI movement, desensitization and reprocessing, and CPT cognitive processing therapy.
The critical thing for clinicians to understand about using EMDR with an experiencer is that the therapy targets the memory network in the brain. It utilizes bilateral stimulation to tax the working memory, which physically reduces the emotional charge and vividness of the stored memory.
It takes the heat out of the memory.
Exactly. And the mechanism works regardless of the objective physical source of the memory. You, as the therapist, do not have to believe your client was physically levitated onto a spacecraft to help them process the somatic terror trapped in their nervous system.
You are treating the nervous system's response to the memory. You're not authenticating the physics of the event. But once that acute trauma is regulated, once they aren't having panic attacks at night, they still have to live in a world that feels fundamentally alien to them. They need a framework for integration. And this is where acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, becomes an incredibly powerful modality.
Yes, ACT is wonderful for this. Recent findings published by the British Psychological Society explore how ACT is uniquely suited for anomalous experiences. It facilitates the movement from what they call mind identification, where the client is totally fused with their thoughts and fears, to disidentification. We can apply the 4 core pivots of psychological flexibility directly to the experiencer client.
Okay, let's walk through those 4 pivots. Number 1 is contact with the present moment. When a client is sitting on your couch, just spinning out in a state of sheer panic about interdimensional timelines, future global apocalypses, or what the entities might do next week, you use grounding techniques to pull their awareness forcefully back into the physical body right here, right now.
Yes. Number 2 is cognitive diffusion. This is crucial. It involves teaching the client to relate to their thoughts expansively. They learn to view their thoughts as events passing through the mind rather than absolute truths.
Okay.
This prevents bizarre or terrifying thoughts from triggering maladaptive behaviors. They learn that a thought is just a thought. It isn't literally true of their core self.
Okay, hold on. I have to stop you there. Cognitive diffusion.
Yeah.
If a client looks me dead in the eye and says a gray alien is actively communicating with them telepathically right now, telling them that the world is going to end, telling them that's just a thought, observe it passing by is going to sound incredibly dismissive. How does a therapist survive that session without completely alienating the client and invalidating their lived reality?
That is exactly where standard clinical practice has to stretch. You are entirely right. If you dismiss it as just random brain firing, you will lose the therapeutic alliance instantly.
Let's walk out.
They will. So instead, we apply a concept known as compassionate non-interference. We teach the client to observe the communication without automatically attaching their core identity or their compliance to it.
What does that mean practically, though?
It means if they are receiving telepathic communication, we don't debate the physics of telepathy. We don't try to prove the voice isn't real. Instead, we interrogate the utility of the communication.
No.
We ask the client, is this voice helpful? Is it loving? Does it serve your personal growth and stability? It's about restoring their cognitive sovereignty.
Oh, I see. You are restoring the power of intent.
Yeah.
You teach them that even if the entity is real, they still have agency.
Exactly.
That the communication is intrusive or fear-based, you empower the client to set a psychic boundary. You teach them they have the right to say no, to send back a feeling of love or neutrality, or to simply refuse to engage with the transmission. You empower the client to be the absolute gatekeeper of their own consciousness.
And that's the essence of the third pivot. Self is context. This is a profound shift. The client moves from the narrative of victimization, what ACT calls self as content, the rigid story of I am a helpless abductee, to becoming an awareing presence.
They zoom out.
They realize they are the massive, expansive container in which these strange experiences happen rather than being defined by the experience itself.
And the fourth pivot is experiential acceptance. Opening up to unwanted sensations, memories, or bizarre energetic feelings fully without psychological defense. Because resisting the experience creates the friction that actually causes psychological suffering.
Those four pivots are transformative, and when that agency is restored, when the trauma is integrated and the ontological shock is metabolized, something incredible happens.
The growth.
Right. Effective therapy in these cases doesn't just return the client to their previous pre-encounter baseline. It acts as a catalyst for profound post-traumatic growth. Which brings us to the question, what does a successfully integrated NHI experiencer actually look like?
What happens when the dust settles? The Life Changes Inventory, or LCI, heavily utilized by Dr. Ring and Dr. Mack, tracks these transformative after effects over time. And the data paints a picture of a radical evolution in consciousness. The client essentially undergoes an aggressive, spontaneous software update for human empathy.
It really is a software update.
Post-integration, we see massive, statistically significant increases in their appreciation for everyday life, self-acceptance, deep compassion for others, ecological sensitivity, and a quest for a universal, non-dogmatic spirituality.
And just as importantly, we see sharp, measurable decreases in the areas that define our modern materialist trance. They show a profoundly decreased concern with material wealth or social status.
Right, the rat race just doesn't matter anymore.
Exactly. There is a massive drop in competitive striving. They exhibit a significant decrease in the fear of death, and they almost universally reject adherence to rigid, dogmatic religious institutions, favoring personal spiritual experience over institutional doctrine.
It's the ultimate perspective shift. It's like a cutthroat corporate lawyer who suddenly takes a vow of silence and moves to a permaculture farm because the underlying currency of their reality shifted overnight from capital to connection. It is a complete and total reorganization of human values. So let's summarize the mission for the clinician listening to this. When that structural engineer tells you they floated through their ceiling, you are not just treating hallucinations. You are not managing a schizotypal personality disorder.
No, you are not.
You are treating profound ontological shock. You have the tools to help them. Utilize EMDR and cognitive processing therapy to regulate the acute somatic trauma. Utilize acceptance and commitment therapy to build psychological flexibility, cognitive diffusion, and a new sense of self.
And you have to respect the trauma of their shattered reality.
Absolutely. But more importantly, recognize the massive potential for post-traumatic growth. You are helping them integrate a multidimensional awareness that reliably results in profound empathy, deep peace, and ecological stewardship. That is all for today's deep dive. We'll catch you next time.